The morning light from 3 different suns streamed through the massive windows of Classroom 7 Alpha aboard Nexus Prime Station. Professor Kethver adjusted his teaching robes and looked out at his mixed class of young beings from across the galaxy. 23 students sat in their specially designed seats, each one built to accommodate their unique biology. The insectoid Zixthu perched on a raised platform that let his 6 legs dangle comfortably. The crystalline being Quell sat in a chair that channeled light through special prisms to keep her energy levels stable. The amphibious Nikari student Lisa had a moisture pad beneath her to prevent her skin from drying out. Professor Kethver cleared his throat, a sound that came out as a gentle chime due to his Altarian vocal cords. His tall, blue-skinned frame commanded attention as he activated the holographic display at the front of the room. The class fell silent, though several students continued to fidget in ways that were normal for their species. Today marks a special day in our survival studies program, Professor Kethver announced, his voice carrying the formal tone that all students had learned to respect. We have been granted a rare opportunity to learn from someone who comes from one of the most dangerous worlds ever catalogued by the Galactic Council. A ripple of excitement passed through the classroom. Vexilani, the young Draconis warrior scholar, sat up straighter in his reinforced chair. His scaled skin shimmered with anticipation, and small wisps of smoke curled from his nostrils. The Zentari student Alex began calculating probability matrices in his head, a habit that made his large eyes glow with a soft blue light. Even the usually calm Veltar diplomatic student Mira leaned forward, her elongated fingers drumming against her desk in a rhythm that expressed curiosity in her species' body language. "A hunter from a death world?" whispered Zixthu, his compound, eyes reflecting light in patterns that showed excitement mixed with concern. "I have read about such beings in the restricted archives." Professor Kethver nodded, understanding their anticipation. For most of these students, Deathworlders were the stuff of legend and cautionary tales. These were beings who had evolved on planets so hostile that survival required constant vigilance, incredible strength, or deadly cunning. The stories spoke of creatures with natural weapons, enhanced reflexes, and an instinct for violence that made them feared across the galaxy. "Our guest comes from Earth, a Class 12 death world," the professor continued, and several students gasped audibly. Class 12 was among the highest danger ratings possible. Only 3 worlds in known space had ever received such a classification, and contact with their inhabitants was strictly regulated by the Council. The door to the classroom slid open with a soft hiss, and everyone turned to see who would enter. They expected to see some sort of monster, perhaps a being covered in natural armor or sporting visible weapons. They prepared themselves for something that would tower over them with obvious predatory features and an aura of barely contained violence. Instead, Jake Morrison walked through the door. The silence that followed was not one of fear, but of confusion. Jake stood about average height compared to most humanoid species, maybe a bit shorter than Professor Kethver. His brown hair was neatly combed, and he wore simple clothes that looked more suited for a library than a battlefield. His skin was pale and appeared soft, lacking any obvious protective features. He carried no visible weapons, showed no signs of enhanced musculature, and his movements seemed casual and unhurried. "Good morning," Jake said, his voice pleasant and friendly. He smiled, revealing teeth that, while pointed, were no more impressive than those of a dozen other omnivorous species in the room. "Thank you for letting me join your class." Zixthu turned to his neighbor, a gaseous being named Flux, who communicated through color changes in his containment suit. The colors that swirled across Flux's form clearly expressed doubt and confusion. Several other students exchanged glances that conveyed similar thoughts. This could not possibly be a Deathworlder. Professor Kethver seemed to sense their confusion. "Students, I present Jake Morrison from Earth. He has volunteered to share his experiences and perhaps participate in some of our practical exercises." Jake walked to an empty seat that had been prepared for him, one designed for standard humanoid biology. As he moved, the students watched carefully, looking for signs of the legendary Deathworld conditioning. They saw none. His gait was normal, his posture relaxed. He did not scan the room for threats or position himself with his back to a wall, as the stories suggested all Deathworlders did instinctively. "Perhaps there has been some mistake," Vexilani said, though he kept his voice respectful. "This being appears quite ordinary." Jake chuckled, a sound that made several students flinch despite its harmless nature. "I get that a lot," he said. "Earth humans probably don't look like what you were expecting." The crystalline student Quell tilted. Her head, light refracting through her transparent features and patterns that indicated analytical thinking. "The classification system must be flawed," she said in her chiming voice. "No being from a true death world could appear so physically unremarkable." "Classification errors do occur," agreed Alex, his large Zentari brain already working through. "Possible explanations. Perhaps Earth was miscategorized due to insufficient data or cultural misunderstandings." Jake settled into his chair and pulled out a simple notepad, the kind used by students throughout the galaxy. "I am just here to learn about your species and how you handle survival situations," he said. "I hope I can contribute something useful to the discussions." Professor Kethvar watched this exchange with interest. He had taught survival studies for over 40 standard years and had seen students from hundreds of different worlds. Something about Jake's demeanor reminded him of his early days, studying apex predators on his home world of Altair 7. The most dangerous hunters were often the ones that appeared most harmless until the moment they struck. "Let us begin today's lesson," the professor announced, activating his holographic display. "We will be studying predator identification and the various hunting strategies employed by dangerous species across the galaxy." As images of fearsome creatures appeared in the air above them, the students took notes and asked questions. Jake wrote in his notepad just like everyone else, occasionally raising his hand to ask about specific details. His questions were simple and seemed to show genuine curiosity rather than any particular expertise. The class proceeded normally for the first hour, with students sharing information about dangerous predators from their homeworlds. Vexilani described the flame tigers of Draconis Prime, massive creatures that could breathe fire and leap incredible distances. Lisa told them about the sonic eels of her water world, beings that could stun prey with sound waves powerful enough to shatter stone. When it came to Jake's turn, he simply said, "Earth has lots of different predators, but humans learn to work together to deal with them." His explanation was brief and unremarkable, reinforcing the growing belief among the students that humans had been incorrectly classified as dangerous. As the lesson continued and the first day drew to a close, the students felt a mixture of disappointment and relief. They had hoped to encounter a legendary Deathworlder, but instead they had met someone who seemed as ordinary as any peaceful species in the galaxy. Jake Morrison appeared to be nothing more than a friendly, slightly naive being who had somehow ended up classified far above his actual capabilities. The second day of class brought a different energy to classroom 7 Alpha. Word had spread through the student dormitories about the supposed Deathworlder who seemed anything but dangerous. Jake Morrison had become something of a curiosity among the young beings aboard Nexus Prime Station. Some students felt disappointed that their first encounter with a legendary Deathworlder had proven so anticlimactic. Others felt relieved that they would not be studying alongside something truly terrifying. Professor Kethvar noticed the change in atmosphere as soon as he entered the room. The students were more relaxed, chatting among themselves in ways they had not the previous day when they expected to meet a fearsome predator. Jake sat in his assigned seat, reading through what appeared to be basic academy materials about interspecies communication. He looked up and smiled when the professor arrived, offering a cheerful greeting that seemed to confirm everyone's assessment of him as harmless. "Today we will continue our study of predator behavior," Professor Kethvar announced, activating the holographic display. "Specifically, we will examine how different hunting strategies have evolved across various planetary environments." Vexilani raised his scaled hand, small puffs of smoke emerging from his nostrils as he spoke. "Professor, I have been thinking about our discussion yesterday. With respect to our new classmate, I believe there may be significant errors in the Galactic Council's classification system." Jake looked up from his notes with apparent interest. Oh, what kind of errors? The council has classified your species and your world as extremely dangerous. Vexilani explained, his tone becoming more confident as he spoke. Yet you display none of the characteristics we associate with true Deathworld predators. My people, the Draconis, evolved on a world where we competed with flame tigers, crystal serpents, and storm ravens. We developed natural weapons, enhanced reflexes, and combat instincts necessary for survival. To demonstrate his point, Vexilani exhaled a controlled burst of flame that illuminated his section of the classroom without triggering the safety systems. His scales rippled with color changes that indicated strength and confidence. This is what evolution on a dangerous world produces. Several other students nodded in agreement. Zixthu clicked his mandibles in a pattern that expressed support for Vexilani's argument. My homeworld requires constant vigilance against web spinners and tunnel hunters, the insectoid being added. I possess natural climbing abilities, compound vision that detects movement across multiple spectrums and reflexes fast enough to avoid surprise attacks. Lisa, the amphibious Nakari student, demonstrated her natural camouflage abilities by shifting her skin color to match her seat perfectly. Survival on my world requires the ability to hide from both aerial and aquatic predators, she explained. Those who could not blend with their environment were eliminated long ago. Jake watched these demonstrations with what appeared to be genuine fascination. That's really impressive, he said, making notes in his pad. Humans don't have any special abilities like that. Professor Kethver found himself in an interesting position. The students were making logical arguments based on observable evidence. Yet he knew from Jake's classified file that Earth humans were indeed formidable in ways that were not immediately apparent. He decided to let the discussion continue, curious to see where it would lead. Alex, the Zentari student, began projecting mathematical equations into the air using his natural bioelectric abilities. I have calculated the probability that a species could achieve space travel from a truly dangerous world without developing obvious adaptive advantages, he announced. The chances are approximately 0.003%. Perhaps the classification was based on outdated information, suggested Quell, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated careful analysis. Or maybe Earth was dangerous in the past but has since become more hospitable. Vexilani stood up, his impressive height and natural armor making him look every inch the warrior his species was known to be. I propose we request a demonstration, he said, addressing Professor Kethver directly. If humans are truly Deathworld predators, surely Jake would be able to show us some of their hunting prowess. The classroom fell silent as all eyes turned to Jake. He looked around at the expectant faces, then shrugged in a gesture that was somehow both apologetic and friendly. I don't really know about hunting prowess, he said. I mean, I've been camping a few times, but I'm not really here to show off or anything. I'm here to learn about all of your species and how you handle different situations. This humble response seemed to confirm every suspicion the students had developed. A true Deathworld predator would likely welcome the chance to demonstrate their abilities, not deflect with modesty. Vexilania's expression shifted from challenge to something approaching pity. Perhaps we have made our guest uncomfortable, said Nira, the diplomatic Veltar student. Her elongated fingers moved in graceful patterns that conveyed concern and apology. We should not pressure someone to perform for our entertainment. Professor Kethver recognized that a teaching moment was presenting itself. The students were making assumptions based on limited data, exactly the kind of thinking that could prove dangerous in real survival situations. Actually, he said, Vexilania's suggestion has merit, though perhaps not in the way he intended. The professor moved to the front of the classroom, his tall frame casting shadows across the holographic display. Tomorrow, we will conduct a practical exercise in the station's biodome facility. This will give all of you the opportunity to demonstrate your natural survival abilities in a controlled environment. Excitement rippled through the classroom. The biodome was a massive facility that could simulate dozens of different planetary environments. Students rarely got to use it for practical exercises, as it was typically reserved for advanced training programs. The exercise will involve survival scenarios appropriate to each species, Professor Kethver continued. You will be placed in an environment with holographic prey and predators, and your task will be to survive while accomplishing specific objectives. Jake raised his hand. Will it be safe? I don't want to hurt anyone or get hurt myself. Vexilani could not help but snort, sending a small puff of flame toward the ceiling. The safety protocols are absolute, he said. No real harm can come to anyone in the biodome. The holographic creatures cannot actually damage you, and force fields prevent students from injuring each other. That sounds fine then, Jake said. Returning to his notes as if the entire discussion had been about planning a simple field trip rather than a test of predatory capabilities, the rest of the class period was spent discussing the technical details of the upcoming exercise. Professor Kethvar explained the scoring system, the safety protocols, and the various environmental options available in the biodome. Students would be evaluated on their ability to locate and capture holographic prey while avoiding holographic predators. Points would be awarded for successful hunts, survival time, and efficient use of natural abilities. As the day's lesson concluded, the students gathered in small groups to discuss strategy and expectations. Vexilani spoke confidently about Draconis, hunting techniques that combined aerial mobility with flame attacks. Zixthu demonstrated climbing patterns he would use to hunt from above. Lisa practiced rapid camouflage changes that would let her ambush prey. Jake packed his simple notepad and stood to leave, but was approached by several students who seemed genuinely concerned about his prospects in the upcoming exercise. You certain you want to participate? Asked Mira, her tone gentle but worried. There is no shame in observing rather than competing. I appreciate the concern, Jake replied, but I think it could be a good learning experience. Besides, you never know what might happen. As Jake left the classroom, the students watched him go with a mixture of sympathy and puzzlement. Tomorrow's exercise would likely prove embarrassing for the human, but perhaps it would also demonstrate to the Galactic Council that their classification system needed serious revision. Professor Kethver remained behind, reviewing the exercise parameters. On his personal display, he made several subtle adjustments to the program, additions that would not be apparent to the students but might prove educational for everyone involved. As one of the few beings aboard the station who had read Jake's complete file, he suspected that tomorrow's demonstration would be far more enlightening than anyone expected. The biodome facility aboard Nexus Prime Station stretched out like a miniature world beneath its transparent ceiling. The massive space could generate any environment found across the galaxy, complete with appropriate weather patterns, terrain features, and atmospheric conditions. Today it had been configured as a temperate forest world, similar to dozens of planets where various species had evolved their hunting skills. Tall trees created a canopy that filtered the artificial sunlight, while undergrowth provided cover. For both predators and prey, Professor Kethver stood in the observation deck overlooking the dome, surrounded by monitoring equipment that would track every aspect of the exercise below. Commander Brass, the station's security chief, stood beside him reviewing safety protocols on a handheld display. The commander was a stocky humanoid whose species had evolved on a peaceful trade world, and he remained skeptical about the wisdom of allowing a Class 12 Deathworlder to participate in student exercises. The safety fields are active and all emergency protocols are engaged, Commander Brass reported, though his tone suggested he was not entirely comfortable with the situation. However, I still think we should reconsider allowing the human to participate. Professor Kethver adjusted the holographic controls, adding the final touches to the exercise environment. Jake Morrison is here as an invited guest of the Academy, he replied calmly. We cannot treat him differently based on prejudice or assumptions. Down in the biodome, 24 students prepared for the exercise in a cleared area that served as the starting zone. Each wore a lightweight monitoring harness that would track their vital signs and movements throughout the simulation. The harnesses also projected personal force fields that would prevent actual injury during encounters with holographic predators or other students. Vexilani stretched his wings and tested his flame breathing, sending controlled bursts of fire toward the sky. His natural armor gleamed in the filtered sunlight, and his movements displayed the confident grace of a born predator. Several other students watched him with admiration, recognizing the obvious advantages his species possessed in hunting situations. Zixthu scuttled up the nearest tree with ease, his 6 legs finding purchase on the bark as his compound eyes scanned the environment for optimal hunting positions. From his elevated perch, he could see movement patterns in the undergrowth that indicated the presence of holographic prey animals. Lisa tested her camouflage abilities, her skin shifting through different shades of green and brown until she nearly vanished against the forest background. The amphibious features that made her stand out in the classroom became advantages in this humid environment where her natural moisture retention would prevent fatigue. Alex stood in the center of the starting area, his large Zentari brain already processing environmental data and calculating optimal hunting strategies. Mathematical equations flickered across his vision as he analyzed wind patterns, prey movement probabilities, and predator behavior algorithms. Jake Morrison appeared to be having difficulty with his monitoring harness. He fumbled with the straps and settings, asking nearby students for help with adjustments that seemed simple to everyone else. When Nira offered assistance, he gratefully accepted her help calibrating the force field projectors and vital sign monitors. "Are you certain you understand the exercise parameters?" Nira asked, her diplomatic training making her naturally concerned for others' welfare. "The objective is to hunt holographic prey while avoiding holographic predators. Points are awarded based on successful captures and survival time." Jake nodded, though he still seemed uncertain about some of the technical details. "So the animals aren't real, but they act like real animals?" he asked. "And we're supposed to catch them somehow?" Professor Kethver's voice echoed through the biodome from hidden speakers. "Students, the exercise will begin in 60 seconds. Remember that while the creatures are holographic, they are programmed with realistic behavior patterns based on actual predator and prey species from across the galaxy. The simulation will run for 2 hours, with scoring updates provided every 30 minutes. Vexilani positioned himself at the edge of the forest, his keen senses already detecting the scent markers that indicated holographic prey in the area. His hunting instincts, honed through millions of years of evolution on Draconis Prime, guided his preparations as he planned his initial strike. Zixthu had climbed even higher, using his natural abilities to scout the terrain from above. His compound eyes could track multiple movement patterns simultaneously, giving him a significant advantage in locating both prey and potential threats. Lisa had already begun moving toward a marshy area where her amphibious nature would provide maximum benefit. Her skin continued to shift colors, matching her surroundings so perfectly that other students lost track of her position. "Exercise begins now," Professor Kethver announced. The students scattered into the forest with impressive efficiency. Vexilani took to the air, his powerful wings carrying him above the canopy where he could spot prey from optimal hunting altitude. Within minutes, he had identified a group of holographic deer-like creatures and dove toward them with predatory precision. His attack was magnificent to watch. Flame preceded his descent, startling the holograms into panicked flight patterns that Vexilani had learned to predict. He struck with controlled fury, his claws and teeth finding their marks as the simulation registered successful kills. The observation deck registered his first points within 5 minutes of the exercise beginning. Zixthu employed a completely different strategy. From his elevated position, he dropped silently onto unsuspecting prey, his natural ambush instincts serving him well. His 6-limbed coordination allowed him to pin holographic creatures while delivering precise strikes that the simulation recognized as clean kills. Alex took a methodical approach, using his mathematical abilities to track prey movements and predict optimal interception points. While his kills came less frequently than those of his more physically gifted classmates, each hunt was executed with calculated precision that maximized point efficiency, Lisa had found her element in the marshy terrain, where her camouflage abilities and aquatic adaptations allowed her to hunt amphibious prey that other students could not effectively pursue. Her patient approach yielded steady points as she captured one creature after another with minimal energy expenditure. Jake Morrison, meanwhile, appeared to be struggling. He moved through the forest with what seemed like excessive noise, his footsteps crackling through undergrowth in ways that would alert any real predator or prey to his presence. He missed obvious tracks, walked past clear signs of animal activity, and generally demonstrated what appeared to be a complete lack of hunting instinct when he encountered his first holographic prey, a rabbit-like creature that should have been easy to catch. Jake's attempt was clumsy and unsuccessful. The creature easily evaded his grabbing attempt and bounded away into the undergrowth. Other students who witnessed this performance exchanged sympathetic glances, feeling embarrassed. On behalf of the supposed Deathworlder, Professor Kethver watched from the observation deck with interest. While Jake's performance appeared amateurish, careful observation revealed subtle details that suggested a different interpretation. The human's movements, while noisy, followed patterns that seemed almost deliberate. His missed opportunities occurred in areas where success would have been trivial, but information gathering was possible after 30 minutes. The first scoring update was announced. Vexilani led with an impressive total, having captured multiple prey creatures using aerial tactics that showcased his species' natural advantages. Zixthu and Lisa followed with respectable scores that reflected their specialized hunting abilities. Alex had achieved steady results through mathematical precision. Jake Morrison ranked dead last, having successfully captured only a single small creature after multiple failed attempts. The other students had moved from sympathy to outright concern about his prospects for completing the exercise safely. During a brief rest period, several students approached Jake to offer advice and encouragement. Vexilani demonstrated proper stalking techniques, while Zixthu explained the importance of elevation and hunting strategy. Lisa showed him how to read environmental signs that indicated animal presence. Jake listened attentively to all their suggestions, asking questions that seemed to demonstrate his lack of understanding about basic hunting principles. He appeared grateful for their help, though his subsequent attempts showed little improvement. What none of the students noticed was that Jake's questions were systematically gathering information about their individual capabilities, preferred strategies, and behavioral patterns. His apparent failures were occurring in locations that provided optimal observation points for studying both the holographic creatures and his fellow students. As the first hour concluded, Jake had established a clear picture of the biodome's layout, the behavior patterns of the holographic fauna, and the hunting styles employed by each of his classmates. His low score reflected not inability, but patience and preparation for objectives that extended beyond the simple parameters of the exercise. Professor Kethver activated the biodome's communication system as the first hour of the exercise concluded. Students, we will now begin Phase 2 of the survival simulation. Environmental hazards will be activated, more dangerous predators will be introduced, and a new scoring element will be added. The students gathered their energy and attention as the announcement continued. You may now hunt each other for bonus points. Contact with another student's force field will register as a successful hunt and award significant bonus scoring. Remember that the safety protocols ensure no actual harm can occur. Excitement rippled through the group of young beings. This was the element many had been waiting for. The chance to test their abilities against peers rather than simple holographic creatures. For species that had evolved as apex predators, the opportunity to engage in safe combat was irresistible. Vexilani stretched his wings and grinned, revealing teeth designed for tearing flesh. Now the real hunt begins, he announced, small flames dancing around his claws. Let us see which species truly deserves the title of predator. The Draconis warrior's confidence was infectious. Other students began positioning themselves strategically, evaluating potential targets and threats among their classmates. The alliance of mutual assistance that had developed during the first phase evaporated as competitive instincts took over. Jake Morrison stood apart from the main group, still appearing confused by the technical aspects of his monitoring equipment. He raised his hand tentatively. "So we're hunting each other now? Is that safe?" "Completely safe," Zixthu assured him, though the insectoid's compound eyes were already scanning for advantageous positions. "The force fields prevent any real contact, and the simulation registers symbolic kills rather than actual ones." Several students exchanged glances that clearly communicated their thoughts. Jake would make an easy target for bonus points, allowing them to pad their scores before facing more challenging opponents. His poor performance in the first phase had marked him as the weakest member of the group. Vexilani approached Jake with what appeared to be friendly concern. "Perhaps you should remain in the starting area," he suggested. "The second phase will be considerably more dangerous, and you seem to be having difficulty with the basic hunting requirements." Jake nodded gratefully. "That might be smart. I don't want to get in anyone's way or mess up your strategies." The other students dispersed into the forest with renewed energy, each one confident in their ability to excel in this more challenging phase. They had observed each other's capabilities during the first hour and felt they understood the relative strengths and weaknesses of their competition. What they failed to notice was the subtle change in Jake Morrison's demeanor as soon as they moved out of sight. The confused, friendly expression melted away, replaced by something far more focused and calculating. His movements became quieter, more purposeful, as he began to follow the dispersing students at a distance that kept him undetected. Professor Kethver watched from the observation deck as Jake began to move through the forest with completely different body language. Gone were the clumsy footsteps and obvious mistakes. The human moved like water between the trees, his path taking him through terrain that provided maximum concealment while offering clear sight lines to his targets. "Interesting," Commander Brass murmured, reviewing Jake's movement patterns on his tracking display. "His mobility characteristics have changed significantly." In the forest below, Vexilani had chosen Zixthu as his first target, reasoning that the insectoid's climbing abilities would provide a good challenge while his smaller size would make him manageable prey. The Draconis warrior used his aerial capabilities to gain altitude, then began a hunting pattern designed to force Zixthu down from his elevated positions. The battle between them was spectacular, showcasing the natural abilities both species had developed on their respective death worlds. Vexilani's flame attacks lit up the forest canopy, while Zixthu's incredible agility allowed him to dodge and weave between the aerial assaults. Both beings were fully engaged in their contest, their attention completely focused on each other. Neither of them noticed Jake Morrison moving into position beneath them. What happened next would have been impossible to predict based on Jake's earlier performance. He analyzed the combat patterns of both aliens, identifying the moment when Zixthu would be forced to descend to avoid one of Vexilani's flame bursts. Instead of attempting a direct attack, Jake positioned himself at the exact point where the insectoid would land and simply waited when Zixthu dropped from the canopy to avoid a particularly intense flame attack. He found Jake standing motionless in what should have been an empty clearing. The insectoid's compound eyes registered surprise an instant before Jake's hand touched his force field, triggering the simulation's kill recognition system. "Impossible?" Zixthu clicked, his mandibles expressing complete bewilderment. "How did you predict my landing position?" Jake smiled, though something in his expression was different from the friendly confusion he had displayed earlier. "Lucky guess," he said simply. Before melting back into the forest as quietly as he had appeared, Vexilani descended to investigate, finding only Zixthu in a state of confused elimination and no sign of the human who had somehow achieved an impossible ambush. The Draconis warrior's flames flickered with uncertainty as he tried to understand what had just occurred. Across the biodome, similar scenes began to unfold. Lisa had been stalking Alex through the marshy terrain, using her camouflage abilities to remain undetected while she positioned herself for an ambush. Her skin had perfectly matched the muddy shore of a small stream, making her essentially invisible to normal visual detection. She never saw Jake coming. The human appeared beside her as if he had materialized from the earth itself, his hand making contact with her force field before she could react. Her camouflage abilities, which had served her species for millions of years, had been completely bypassed by hunting techniques she did not understand. "How?" Lisa gasped, her skin cycling through colors that expressed shock and disbelief. Jake knelt beside the stream, cupping water in his hands as if he had simply been getting a drink. "You're really good at blending in," he said conversationally. "But you still have to breathe, and breath creates humidity patterns in the air." The explanation meant nothing to Lisa, whose species had never needed to develop such sophisticated tracking methods. As Jake disappeared once again into the forest, she was left to ponder hunting techniques that seemed to border on supernatural perception. Alex had been using his mathematical abilities to track multiple students simultaneously, calculating probability matrices that should have made him unpredictable to any pursuit. His large brain processed dozens of variables, including terrain advantages, weather patterns, and behavioral tendencies to create movement patterns that defied conventional tracking. He was completely unprepared when Jake simply stepped out from behind a tree directly in his path. "Your math is really impressive," Jake said as Alex's force field registered the contact. "But you're calculating based on how your species thinks about movement, not how a persistence hunter would approach the problem." One by one, students found themselves eliminated by the human they had dismissed as harmless. Each encounter followed a similar pattern. Jake would appear exactly where they least expected him, make contact with their force field, and offer a brief comment that demonstrated understanding of their capabilities far beyond what he had previously displayed. Professor Kethver monitored the elimination sequence with growing fascination. Jake was not using superior speed, strength, or reflexes to defeat his classmates. Instead, he was demonstrating something far more subtle and perhaps more dangerous: the ability to understand and predict behavior patterns with accuracy that bordered on prescience. Vexilani remained as the final target, his natural advantages having allowed him to avoid elimination longer than his peers. The Draconis warrior flew above the forest canopy, using his aerial superiority to remain out of reach while he tried to understand what had happened to his classmates. When Jake finally appeared in a clearing below him, Vexilani felt a mixture of relief and confidence. Here at last was a direct confrontation where his natural advantages would prove decisive. He dove toward the human with all the speed and fury his species was famous for, flames preceding his descent in a display that would have terrified any reasonable prey. Jake stood perfectly still until the last possible moment, then took a single step to one side. Vexilani's attack carried him past his target, and as he tried to correct his trajectory, Jake's hand made gentle contact with his force field. The simulation registered the touch as the final elimination of the exercise. "How?" Vexilani demanded as he landed heavily, his natural grace disrupted by confusion and disbelief. Jake looked up at the observation deck where Professor Kethver was watching. "Persistence hunting," he said simply. "We don't need to be faster or stronger. We just need to outlast everything else." The biodome fell silent except for the artificial sounds of wind through synthetic trees and the distant calls of holographic creatures that continued their programmed behaviors. 23 students stood in various stages of elimination, their force fields dim and their monitoring equipment displaying scores that told a story none of them had expected. Jake Morrison remained in the center of the clearing, his simple clothes unmarked by the hunt and his breathing steady despite having outmaneuvered every one of his classmates. The transformation from confused newcomer to apex predator had been so complete that several students wondered if they were looking at the same being who had struggled with basic equipment just hours before. Professor Kethver's voice echoed through the dome from the observation deck. "Exercise complete. All students please gather in the starting area for debriefing." The walk back through the forest was subdued. Students who had begun the day confident in their natural superiority found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about predator hierarchies and Deathworld classifications. Vexilani walked with his wings folded tight against his body, his usual confident swagger replaced by thoughtful introspection. Zixthu scuttled along beside him, his compound eyes dim with confusion. I have been trained in ambush tactics since I was old enough to climb, he clicked softly. My people have perfected these techniques over millions of years of evolution. How does a being with no apparent specialization defeat such advantages? Lisa's skin continued to shift through colors that expressed bewilderment and concern. He saw through my camouflage as if it were not there, she said. My species has relied on invisibility for survival since before we developed language. What kind of predator can track what cannot be seen? Alex's large brain worked furiously to process what had occurred, but his mathematical models provided no satisfactory explanations. The probability calculations are impossible, he muttered. No hunting strategy should be effective against such diverse defensive adaptations. When they reached the starting area, Jake was already there, sitting on a fallen log and making notes in his simple pad. He looked up as the other students approached, and his expression had returned to the friendly, slightly confused demeanor they remembered from the first day. That was really interesting, Jake said, though something in his tone suggested depths. The students were only beginning to appreciate. You all have amazing abilities. I learned a lot watching how your species approached different challenges. Professor Kethvar descended from the observation deck, his tall blue frame moving with the measured pace of someone who had witnessed something significant. Commander Brass accompanied him, his earlier skepticism replaced by thoughtful attention to the human who had just systematically defeated an entire class of naturally gifted predators. Before we discuss the exercise results, Professor Kethvar began, I want each of you to consider what you observed today. Jake, would you be willing to explain your approach to the other students? Jake looked around at the expectant faces, many of which still showed signs of confusion and disbelief. I guess it comes down to persistence hunting, he said. Humans aren't the fastest or strongest predators, but we're probably the most stubborn. Vexilani stepped forward, his scales still showing the color patterns that indicated he was processing difficult concepts. But you appeared to predict our movements with impossible accuracy. How can persistence explain such precise tactical knowledge? Observation, Jake replied simply. During the first phase, while I was pretending to be bad at hunting, I was actually watching all of you. I learned how each species thinks, how you move, what your instincts tell you to do in different situations. The implications of this statement settled over the students like a cold wind. Jake had been studying them from the moment he entered their classroom, gathering intelligence while presenting himself as harmless and confused. You were never struggling with the exercise, Quell said, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that showed she was recalculating her entire assessment of human capabilities. The poor performance was deliberate deception. Jake nodded. Humans are really good at pattern recognition and behavioral prediction. We had to be, because we evolved alongside predators that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us. Our survival strategy was to understand them better than they understood. US. Professor Kethvar moved to the holographic display, calling up images of various Earth predators that had been uploaded to the Academy's database. The persistence hunting technique Jake demonstrated is indeed how early humans survived on Earth. They would track large prey animals for days or weeks, following them until exhaustion made them vulnerable. Images of ancient human hunters pursuing massive creatures across vast landscapes filled the air above them. The students watched with growing understanding as the professor explained how humans had used intelligence, endurance, and social cooperation to overcome physical disadvantages that should have made them easy prey. But we were not large prey animals, Vexilani protested. We were active predators engaged in complex tactical scenarios. The principle is the same, Jake explained. Instead of running an animal to exhaustion, I observed your behavioral patterns until I could predict where you would be and what you would do. Every species has instinctive responses that become predictable once you understand them. Alex's mathematical mind began to grasp the implications. You were conducting behavioral analysis rather than traditional hunting. You studied us like like specimens. The word hung in the air with uncomfortable implications. Several students shifted uneasily as they realized they had been the subjects of scientific observation by a predator whose capabilities they had completely misjudged. Lisa's skin cycled through colors that expressed a mixture of fear and respect. Is this how humans see other species? As behavioral patterns to be analyzed and exploited? Jake's expression became more serious, and for the first time the students caught a glimpse of something deeper behind his friendly demeanor. Not exploited, he said. Understood. Humans survived by learning to work with other species, not by dominating them, but yes, we do tend to study everyone we meet. Professor Kethver seized on this teachable moment. This illustrates why the Council classified Earth as a Class 1-2 death world despite the lack of obvious physical adaptations in humans. The danger lies not in brute force but in intelligence applied to survival problems. Nira, the diplomatic Veltar student, stepped forward with the graceful movements her species was known for. I think I begin to understand, she said. Human strength lies in adaptability rather than specialization. Exactly, Professor Kethver confirmed. While each of your species develops specific advantages for your particular environments, humans developed general problem-solving abilities that work in any environment. Jake stood up from his log, and the students noticed that his movements now seemed different than before. Not threatening, but purposeful in a way that suggested complete awareness of his surroundings and everyone in them. I hope I haven't made anyone uncomfortable, Jake said, his tone returning to the friendly warmth they remembered. I really am here to learn about your species and cultures. The hunting exercise was just, well, it was fun to stretch those old instincts a bit. Vexilani approached Jake with visible respect, his earlier dismissive attitude completely transformed. I apologize for my earlier assumptions about your capabilities. I now understand why the Council classified your species as dangerous, not dangerous, Jake corrected gently. Just persistent. Humans don't want to hurt anyone, but we're very hard to stop once we decide to do something. The debriefing continued for another hour, with students asking questions about human evolution, hunting techniques, and behavioral analysis methods. Jake answered everything with patience and good humor, though careful observers might have noticed that he revealed only as much information as he chose to share. As the session concluded and students began to leave the biodome, Vexilani lingered behind to speak with Jake privately. Would you be willing to teach me some of these observation techniques? The Draconis warrior asked. My people pride ourselves on being apex predators, but today I learned that physical prowess alone is not sufficient. Jake smiled, and this time the expression seemed completely genuine. I'd be happy to share what I know about pattern recognition, but I think you'll find that you already have most of the skills. You just need to learn to apply them differently. As they walked together toward the exit, Vexilani reflected on the day's lessons. He had expected to demonstrate Draconis superiority over a supposedly misclassified human. Instead, he had learned that true predatory skill lay not in obvious advantages, but in the quiet competence that allowed humans to survive and thrive anywhere in the galaxy. Professor Kethver watched them go, satisfied that his students had learned something far more valuable than hunting techniques. They had discovered that appearances could be deceiving, that intelligence could overcome physical advantages, and that the most dangerous predators were often those who looked the most harmless. The lesson would serve them well in a galaxy where survival often depended on understanding rather than strength, and where the quiet persistence of humanity